There's a hotel in Glastonbury that some locals refuse to mess with after dark, and not just because it looks like the set of the next Netflix horror show. Glastonbury's already known as the occult capital of the country, but even here, this place is on another level. After centuries of history, rumours of tragedy, and countless terrified guests, the Georgian Pilgrim's Hotel has earned itself the reputation of being one of the most haunted buildings in the town. Unexplained noises coming from the cellar, misty figures showing up on camera, and people waking up to find a grinning stranger at the end of their bed who just vanishes into thin air before you even have time to scream. But what actually happened here? Why is this the one place even Glastonbury locals don't want to be alone in at night? So the building that stands here now is thought to have been constructed in the 15th century, around 1475, as a purpose-built hospitium, an inn, a lodging. Hospitium, hospitality, you can kind of see it. And it was owned and operated by the famous Glastonbury Abbey, used to accommodate pilgrims who were visiting, because the Abbey is literally a stone's throw away from the place. Glastonbury Abbey did have accommodation on site for pilgrims, but because this place was extremely significant at the time, literally second in the country to Westminster Abbey, like that's how important we're talking, they needed more space, supply and demand. And so the inn operated as the Pilgrim's Inn of Glastonbury Abbey. Descriptive, we like that. There were mentions of a building on this site before 1475, with some saying that a previous building dating all the way back to the 1100s was here. And I mean, we do have the earliest record stating that a tenant lived here in 1439. Either way, it's generally understood to be one of, if not the oldest, purpose-built inn in the southwest. And to look at it, even nowadays, she fancy. It resembles pretty much a Gothic fortress, very ornate, and this was done on purpose. They wanted to attract the wealthier pilgrims to come and stay here, and so they built a place befitting of that sort of clientele. There were other rumours that perhaps some aspects of the construction were included to the benefit of the abbots of the abbey rather than just the patrons, as there was apparently a tunnel built from the cellar of the Pilgrim's Inn all the way across the street to the abbey. And the story goes that perhaps Abbot John Selwood himself, the head of Glastonbury Abbey at the time the inn was built, or another abbot, actually used that tunnel to indulge in the worldly pleasures that were out of reach for a holy man. The more visceral description that I read somewhere was that the passage was used to enable the abbot to purge his loins. There, now you have that mental image too. There is another legend that ties into the use of this tunnel, but that's getting just a little bit ahead of myself for now. But as time went on, this tunnel was actually sealed up, although there were actually witness accounts of this underground passageway existing. It's supposed to have not been entirely made up for the sake of the legend. A guy called Frederick Bligh Bond was actually the one to find this tunnel in the south side of the cellar, where it extended about 20 feet south underneath the high street before being blocked off by a brick sewer. And I mean, when my favourite ghost programme, Great British Ghosts, actually visited the hotel, they did bang on a bit of the wall down in the cellar, and it was hollow. But just as an aside, because I think it's worth mentioning, Frederick Bligh Bond was an extremely interesting character in Glastonbury's paranormal history. He was the one who was given the job of Director of Excavations for Glastonbury Abbey in 1908, and went on to discover a bunch of buildings and things on the site over the next 13 years. He claimed it wasn't all just through hard work and studying historical records though. Oh no! He said it was through working with his pal, a retired Navy captain called John Allen Bartlett, who also happened to be a medium. Together, they'd used automatic writing, a seance technique where spirits supposedly guided your hand to write messages. According to their story, they were, quote-unquote, chatting with the dead monks of Glastonbury Abbey through this method, and that's how they found out about the building. His bosses at the Church of England didn't really like that, and so he was sacked in 1921. I just wanted to mention that as I found that was interesting, regardless of the fact that archaeologists and skeptics believe that it was entirely possible that he actually just looked at old records and things and that's how he knew. But anyway, back to the story of the Georgian pilgrims. Sorry, I can't resist a tangent when it comes to haunted history. But going into the 16th century, the inn was still doing great, catering to all of these pilgrims. All's good. Until King Henry VIII comes along, or more specifically decides to make himself head of the Church of England, kicking off the dissolution of the monasteries. The translation here being, Henry wanted a divorce, the Pope said said nah, and Henry responded by nuking every monastery in England out of existence, and then pocketing the loot for himself. Just completely rage quit the entire religious infrastructure of the country. Glastonbury Abbey tried to hold out as long as possible. They tried playing nice with the crown, they tried to keep quiet, just keep their heads down a little bit. They may have crossed a few palms with silver, but at the end of the day, Glastonbury Abbey was just too big, too significant, too wealthy to be left alone. In September 1539, the abbey was seized, along with all of its assets, including the Pilgrim's Inn, and then the abbot at the time, Abbot Richard Whiting. He was arrested and found guilty of what was effectively a trumped-up charge of treason. He was imprisoned at the Tower of London for a time before being brought back to Glastonbury Tor, where on the 15th of November 1539, he was hanged, drawn and quartered, with his head displayed over the west gate of the now abandoned Glastonbury Abbey. Just brutal, honestly. There was another bit of a legend, though, that King Henry himself actually came to Glastonbury and stayed at the inn to personally oversee its destruction. It's all rather poetic, but it is said that he stayed in a suite upstairs and watched while the abbey burned down. And that is why this particular suite is now known as the Henry VIII room. Although there are a lot of people out there who say that it likely didn't happen. For one, it's most likely that he just sent people out to do his dirty work. Two, he'd already suffered the jousting injury that had started him off on the road to chronic leg ulcers and gout by that point, so it would have been even less likely that he would have stayed in a room upstairs. And three, the abbey was only dissolved in 1539, it wasn't burned down. Cool backstory behind one of the room names though. After all of this had kicked off, the inn stayed under control of the crown for a bit until it was given to a guy called Edward Seymour, the first Duke of Somerset. Within a couple of decades though, the place was not quite the grand medieval five-star hotel that wealthy pilgrims had come to expect. The building was in such bad shape that there was no way enough people were going to want to stay here. It was kind of in dire need of Gordon Ramsay's spin-off show, Hotel Hell. Somehow though, it survived and continued to operate as a place to stay throughout the Elizabethan and Stuart eras. In 1658, a horse mill was installed into the building, so it could have been that they were either brewing their own beer on site, or it was being used as some sort of industry at that point. But it still seemed to be that civic hotspot for local meetings. There were inquiries held here by royal commissioners in 1672, like official government hearings and things like that. And then the Quakers, a group of Christians who rejected church hierarchy and believed in equality and silent worship. They met here at the inn in 1691. By the middle of the 1800s, the inn's name had changed to be known as the George Hotel. But then in the 20th century, they combined the old and the new names together to make the George and Pilgrim's Hotel. And that's what it's still known as today, though. It's still being operated as a hotel. You can stay the night, have a drink, grab some food, just like those pilgrims from the 15th century. But for all the history that this old hotel has seen, there are other kinds of stories that keep people talking over their pints, not just about old abbots and royal visits. It's the things people say still happen here late at night, when most of the town has gone quiet and the guests have retired to their rooms. And if you ask anyone about the George and Pilgrim's Hotel, the ghost story that you're most likely to hear about first is, surprise, surprise, about a monk. But not just a monk on his own, and that actually may be the reason that he's still haunting the place. Because he is almost always seen with a ghostly woman trailing behind him, known as the Lady in White. And we've just hit two paranormal A-listers there, a monk and a woman in white. You only need a cavalier soldier and a Victorian child and you can shout bingo. But with the monk and the Lady in White, the story there goes that back in the heyday of Glastonbury Abbey, the pair fell in love with each other. And we love a love story over here, but you know, this is my channel and it's the medieval times. We're gonna have a whole big forbidden romance kind of thing going on. The monk was obviously sworn to celibacy, being from the Benedictine order. She's absolutely not supposed to be seeing him, and yet they'd apparently sneak off together. Stolen moments here and there. Allegedly, one version of the story says that they even used that infamous tunnel beneath the abbey and inn to consummate their relationship, which is alright. I'm a candles and roses kind of girl, but when your boyfriend is a Benedictine monk, I guess you'll take what you can get. But with all that context, I'm sure you can imagine that there isn't really a happy ending to a story like this. The two of them were eventually found out, and the punishment for the monk was supposedly brutal. In a kind of cruel twist of irony, it was said that he was walled up alive in the cellar of the Pilgrim's Inn. Stepping back a moment, there is no actual record of that happening, which, let's be real, there never is when it comes to a medieval origin story for a ghost. But it does go some way to explaining why so many people say that they've seen a sad-looking monk wandering the halls of the hotel to this day. way. Some versions of the story make it seem all the more tragic though. There was apparently a German medium who was staying at the hotel who made contact with this pair of ill-fated lovers, and they claimed that actually the monk had never broken his vows of celibacy. The two of them had never been physically intimate, and that was the reason that they were now stuck there, just longing for each other for all eternity. But nowadays, loads of guests and staff have reported seeing a monk dressed in his robes walking along the corridors at night, followed closely behind by an elegant, pale-faced woman. There was even a story from back in the 70s where a woman was staying at the inn and she saw the figure of a monk sitting on the edge of her bed. And this didn't seem to be just like a fleeting image when your brain is still waking up or anything like that. She claimed that she looked at him for a solid 10 or 15 minutes before he dematerialised into thin air. But even more than that, she actually felt the bed sheets tighten around her, as if the weight of the man sitting on the bed would pull the sheets tight. She also said that he wasn't alone. There seemed to be two misty shapes hovering behind him, looking almost like a sort of vapour. And that detail led some people to believe that maybe one of those mists was the woman, and perhaps the other one was another monk or someone who knew about the secret love affair or something. But for that specific encounter, they're not fully sure. But this lady in white, witnesses describe her as having long white or grey hair, and she wears a pale, light-coloured gown, usually white. And she's actually sometimes seen without her monk, as people might catch a glimpse of her in the mirror in a blink and you miss it kind of thing. Some people believe that she has actually been caught on camera too, as there was a photo taken in 2012 which shows some guys who were drinking in the pub one night, and then right there is this white misty figure who definitely wasn't there when they took the photo. But what do you think of that photo though? Some sort of lens flare, smudge on the lens, or a ghost? Let me know. But her lover boy is apparently not the only monk said to still be haunting the George and Pilgrim's hotel. There was a second one, and he's said to have a completely different vibe. This guy, people call him the Fat Monk, which is not the most flattering nickname, but it gets the point across, I guess. Instead of mourning a lost love, this entity is supposedly weirdly cheerful. Guests have seen a rotund, jolly-looking monk, sometimes described as laughing to himself, even as he's walking straight through a solid wall. In one story that I absolutely love, one guest claimed that they were jolted awake when something large bumped into their bed, and when they looked to see what it was, they saw the guy just giggling and staggering away. Sounded like he's just having a grand old time, indulging in the spirits of a different kind found in an old drinking establishment. But despite this guy always being seen in a seemingly great mood, his backstory is a little sadder. I don't think we know for sure who he is, so I don't know how we know this, but apparently the story goes that he actually ended his own life in one of the rooms of the inn, and now his sunny disposition is how he attempted to hide his suffering in life. Whether it was the room that he's most often seen in, the haunted cell, and by cell that's not prison cell, that's just the name used as the room where the monk would live. But guests staying in that room at night report having the covers ripped off them in the middle of the night, lots of claims about unexplained cold spots even in summer, and then the disembodied sound of laughter when there is absolutely no one around. I do always have to add in the caveat that I am a little bit suspicious about cold spots in an old building, and then disembodied laughter. You're in a hotel, other guests, sound might travel weird. Unless you tell me a story where you were the only one in the building, and then that would be a lot creepier. But anyway, that aside, this entity seems to be pretty playful, more of a prankster than someone out to get you in the middle of the night. But these two monks seemingly aren't the only echoes from the hotel's formative years, as in the Henry VIII room, the really nice suite with the four-poster bed, people have seen a full-on circle of 6 monks just sitting together silently in a circle on the floor in the dark. Tell me that that is not nightmare fuel. But not all of the guests seem to be from the medieval times. Some of them seem to be a little bit more fashion forward, only a little bit, because there's apparently a guy been seen wearing an old school blue jacket. The most famous encounter with him happened back in 1976 when a Canadian couple, the McCormacks, booked room 7. So they booked that room specifically because they'd heard about the hotel's haunted reputation in a Canadian finance magazine of all places, and they fancied getting a bit of paranormal action themselves. Bold, but they actually got what they wanted. They booked a haunted room and they got a haunted room experience. In the middle of the night, Mrs. McCormack woke up to a really strange heavy sound, which she registered as 3 footsteps thumping across the room. As her eyes adjusted, she looked over to the foot of her husband's bed, as I think it must have been a twin room. But anyway, she noticed this bright, glimmering light arching across the space. Just a very strange thing to see, so you'd immediately assume, oh, that's just your brain doing weird things, whatever, right? Yeah, no. From this light, a man stepped out, and he was tall and skinny, and he had his eyes locked straight straight on Mrs. McCormack. And he was grinning. Not only is this entity in your space at night, but he knows you're there, you know he's there, and he's just grinning at you. Not okay with this. Nope. Apparently he stayed there for a while, or at least to her what felt like ages, until she finally regained her faculties and leapt out of bed, jumping over to go and wake up her husband, who was sleeping through the whole thing. The second he opened his eyes, poof, grinning man was gone. Mrs. McCormack then starts to try and describe what she saw, to which I can entirely imagine Mr. McCormack's response, but she was adamant. Tall, skinny guy, wearing one of those old sports jackets, like what an older English gentleman would have worn for a nice Sunday picnic. Lovely. And whether this is the same guy or not, but staff have spotted a gentleman in old-fashioned gear, drifting quietly around the bar every now and then, but had that very much not from this era look about him. Seeing someone I can't explain in the bar, totally fine with that. I mean, ask me again if it ever happened, but I'm sure I could handle it a heck of a lot better than someone standing over me while I'm in bed, like another poor woman had to go through on her stay at the hotel in 2000. A journalist called James Meek was doing a piece for The Guardian all about the ghost of Glastonbury and whatnot, and was staying with his wife at the George and Pilgrim's hotel. In the middle of the night, the wife woke up screaming, absolutely traumatised. She claimed that she'd had a nightmare where she'd sensed someone in the room with them. She'd gone to turn the light switch on, but it hadn't worked, and she said that at that moment she woke up. So she opened her eyes and looked around the room to see the figure of a very tall man with unnaturally long arms, which is just not an image I want to see in my head. This guy was covered in a grey mist, and he was standing next to the bed, silently watching. Just no. She, being a braver soul than I could ever be, reached out to touch this figure, only to find that her hand went straight through him, at which point she then screamed again and woke up her husband. James maintained in his article that he assumed that she'd just been asleep the entire time and just dreamt about the figure, but she was convinced that what she had seen was real. In a somewhat less creepy story than Glastonbury's answer to Slenderman, there's the case of the mysterious woman in modern clothes seen at the hotel. And so for everyone always asking me, where are all the modern day ghosts? Here you go. One night there was a business executive who had been working late in the area and he needed a decent night's kip, so he'd got a room at the hotel. He checked in, so far so good, until he's getting settled in his room, and he comes face to face with a woman in totally normal modern clothes. She's just standing there in his room. She looks him dead in the eye, pardon the pun, complains about how cold it is as if she's about to go and grab a manager, and then just vanishes. 1 second she's there, the next, gone. No door opening, no footsteps. This definitely wasn't just some random lady who'd got the wrong room but still wanted to complain about the temperature. The guy kind of just stands there for a moment wondering what on earth has just happened to him when he notices that, yeah, actually the room is now freezing cold when it hadn't been just moments ago. Again though, we don't really know who she is and we have no other identifying features other than her wearing modern clothes, so yeah. But there might be another story involving her, or it's another entity altogether. There was a couple staying in the Abbot de Beers room, and this stay, it was just drama from the get-go with this one. First of all, the poor wife fell and broke her arm the minute she stepped through the threshold, so not off to a good start. And then later that night, her husband dreamed that there was an older woman sitting at the end of his bed, only to wake up and find that she was still there, just staring at him. No explanation, no conversation, nothing. It would be good to know if we had any description on what she was wearing, if she was the same person, whether she was someone different, but we just don't know. The ghost of a child has been seen around the hotel too. What was I saying earlier about paranormal bingo? One of the staff members claimed that he would be in the kitchens alone, just tidying up or whatever, and he would see a kid standing off to the side, watching him. Okay, but before you can even think, oh, it's a guest, they must have taken a wrong turn trying to find the toilets or something, the figure just vanishes. Just, again, blink and you miss it. And so up to this point, all of these ghostly sightings have been relatively benign, creepy most definitely, but not particularly out to get you kind of thing. Until I tell you about this encounter that a particularly unfortunate guest had. She was in her room, settling down in bed for the night, trying to get some sleep, when all of a sudden she felt this massive, unseen force pressing her down, literally pinning her to the bed. She claimed that this force felt huge, heavy, and although she couldn't see anything, she got the distinct impression that this was definitely a male energy. She couldn't move, couldn't even shout for help, nothing. So she did the only thing that she could think to do in that moment and started to pray, basically telling the thing that you need to leave, go towards the light and away from me, thank you. Eventually, the pressure lifted and she could move again. And so to me, that really does sound like a classic case of sleep paralysis, but she was convinced that there was more to it than that. Although she wasn't going to stick around to gather any more data on that hypothesis. As soon as she was able to escape her bed, she packed her stuff and she checked out in the middle of the night. Cannot blame her for that one bit, really. That was the only instance that I could find of this particularly oppressive encounter. So whether it was sleep paralysis, whether it was an entity we've already chatted about, long-armed creepy-ass Slenderman, I'm looking at you, or whether it was something entirely different, that's up to you to draw your own conclusions. Sometimes guests will be in their rooms and they won't see anything much, but just strange things will happen. There was one TripAdvisor review where a husband and wife were staying in a room and the wife felt something lift up her dress while she was getting ready to go down for dinner. She turns to have a go at her husband, but as she does so, she notices that he is nowhere near her. Impossible for him to have done it. Okay, very weird, but moving on. Later that night, while she's asleep, she woke up to the feeling of someone stroking and squeezing her leg. Again, looked over at her husband, not him. So she panicked, obviously, and woke him up, where they supposedly saw an orb fly across the room before the TV turned itself on. Just all of the things happening in the middle of the night. They weren't scared off by it though, calling it an amazing experience. I mean, people pay good money on ghost hunts for that sort of stuff, I guess, so fill your boots, I suppose. And so with all of these things, all of this weirdness, you do start to wonder, is it possibly something to do with the place itself? Is there some sort of energy within the walls of the George and Pilgrim's Hotel that make it more likely for you to have an encounter with something? And the only reason that I'm posing these questions is that there was a very interesting account on Great British Ghosts, where Paul, one of the staff members, he was talking about when he was behind the bar serving one day, and he just noticed a guest walking past the bar area, but she had a dog with her, following at her feet. And this must have been quite a while back because it was during a time when dogs weren't allowed in the hotel, which they are now. So he was just about to follow her, just to, politely remind her of the rules. Really sorry, but you can't bring your dog in here. He finished pouring the pint or doing whatever it was that he was doing, and he went to look back at the woman and saw that the dog was gone. And she was just walking as she had normally, not chasing after a terrier who'd gone AWOL or anything like that. And so he thought to himself, okay, yeah, that was a little bit strange, but whatever. Anyway, a bit later that night, the same woman comes back in, and there it is. There is a dog following her by her feet again. This time, when he got the chance, he asked her about the dog. Obviously, dogs aren't allowed, but I've also seen you with the dog, without the dog, so what's going on here? As if it was the most normal thing in the world, the woman responds to him and says, oh yeah, I've got the spirit of a little dog, follows me everywhere. Not a living dog, a spirit, a ghost dog, like some sort of paranormal emotional support animal. But that's what I mean. I don't get the impression from this guy that he was particularly sensitive to such things. I mean, he clearly must be for that to happen, but it was just really interesting that he could see the little dog there at the hotel. And then by extension of that, his first reaction wasn't, oh, there I go being all sensitive to paranormal energies again. It was, oh, I guess has brought their dog in with them. But at the George and Pilgrim's Hotel, it's not just the big dramatic sightings that make this place feel haunted. Half the time, it's more just the little things. Stuff that happens so often, still in the context of paranormal things happening, but staff have kind of almost come to expect it. Doesn't make it any less creepy, but, Heavy footsteps are commonly reported walking down empty corridors when there's no one there, and guests complain of people running up and down the hallways through the night. But when you go out there to tell them to keep it down, there's no one there. Doors will also slam shut when everything is locked up for the night. And there was one encounter when a manager said that they were chatting to a few staff after closing one night, all chill, when they heard the back door slam and footsteps start marching down the passageway towards them. It was so loud, so real. It definitely happened. All of them heard it, and then they obviously went to go and check what was going on, who had let themselves in or broken in, but there was no one there. The back door was still locked up just as they had left it. Down in the cellar, things get even weirder. Staff members have heard disembodied coughs, sighs, and laughs in the darkness when they know that they're totally alone. There was one story, again from Great British Ghosts, where the guy was saying, look, I'm under no illusions of the place, there's obviously a bit of energy going on here. And so every time he went down into the cellar, he would always call out hello in a, I'm not here to hurt you, I'm just changing a barrel, let's agree to keep out of each other's way kind of thing. But one day, he was busy, distracted, whatever, he forgot to call out. Well, no sooner had he picked up this barrel when he heard someone clear their throat. Just a quick right in his ear hole. Personal space. I'm sure that was a very effective lesson in not skipping the pleasantries. Elsewhere in the hotel, people have heard the sounds of music coming from completely empty rooms. This music is usually described as being either a harp or a lute, definitely not your modern day Radio 1 or something. The second you go and investigate, the music just abruptly stops. In the function room, staff have on multiple occasions heard what sounds like a proper row going on in there. Muffled voices, raised tempers, all of that, only to open the door, and similarly to the music, it stops abruptly abruptly. There's not a soul inside. The bar is another spot for hearing disembodied voices, with some making out the sounds of faint whispers, but then staff members hearing their names called out well past closing when there's no one else about. But a really strange one is where guests complain to reception in the morning, saying that it just seemed to be a really odd time to have a children's party going on in the early hours of the morning. Obviously nothing of the sort happened, but the guests are adamant that they heard all of these kids laughing and screaming, having a whale of a time. Phantom smells are another one at the George and Pilgrim's Hotel. You might get hit with the smell of cigar or pipe smoke, even though of course the place has been strictly non-smoking since 2007. Other times people have caught whiffs of lavender or old school perfume. Perhaps the lady in white has just walked by on her way to meet her sweetheart. With smells though, could there just be a logical reason for it? Old wood may release smells trapped in them when it gets warm. I've heard of that being a thing. I don't know. The poltergeist activity seems a little harder to explain away though. Taps will turn themselves on, sometimes right in front of guests. They'll see the taps actually turning. TVs will also switch themselves on, and sometimes the unseen entity will do a bit of channel surfing. No explanation. Objects will move around with no one around to move them, and there was one time where a previous landlady poured herself a pint of water, had a drink out of it, and then put it down and went off to do something. By the sounds of the story, she was alone, there was no one else around, but when she came back to her water, there were two random metal screws sitting at the bottom of the glass. And I don't know, that just seems mildly threatening to me. Not sure I like that. Lights love to mess about too. Staff will lock up with the lights off, come back and they're on, vice versa. But it really does just seem like the hotel ticks pretty much all of the boxes for a haunted house. Apparently it's happened on multiple occasions that staff members will greet someone who appears to be completely flesh and blood, only for that person to disappear or walk into a room where there's nowhere for them to have disappeared to. And so for all of this to be going on, all of this activity happening in the hotel, most people say is not particularly negative. Creepy, yes, but not negative. I'm sure the woman being pinned down in the middle of the night would beg to differ, and there are plenty of other stories of guests checking out in the middle of the night, plus the Glastonbury locals who refuse to enter at night. Daytime, sure, when it's busy, it feels safe, firmly in the human realm, but nighttime, that's a different story, and some of them want nothing to do with it. But with all of it, the history, the hauntings, even the legends, you can see why people may want to give the George and Pilgrim's Hotel a wide berth after dark. Maybe it's all just stories, maybe it's echoes from another time, maybe it's a bit of both. So stay here if you dare, but don't say that you weren't warned. But I need to know, let me know if you would actually spend the night here, or you'd cross the street like some of the locals. I did see somewhere that some claim that there were up to 20 ghosts haunting this hotel. These are just the stories I could find though, so if you know of any more, get on down to the comments and tell us about them, please. A few of these stories do make me think sleep paralysis. Maybe there's something in the building that makes it more common? Who knows? We've only visited Glastonbury once, and it was a severe risk to my credit card. But we made it all the way through the bookshelves with only some minor arm ache from carrying all of the books. But we never made it into the George and Pilgrim's Hotel. Gutted, but it is definitely right up there on the priority list for the next time we're in the area. Have you stayed here though? Have you worked here? Have you ever experienced something a bit strange? Tell me all of the things, I love reading about them. And if you enjoyed this story, please do like the video, and if you haven't already, please do subscribe too. No pressure, but I think you're a lot cooler if you do. But anyway, that is all from me today. Go get yourself a drink of water. Hydrate first. I want it properly water, and then you can be let loose in the haunted pub. I cannot wait to chat with you more about the morbid, mysterious and macabre. So until next time, sleep safe. Done. Oh wait, not done. Thank you to everyone who voted for me a few months back. The awards were last week, and I had to get them in the background. We brought home both of the awards, Best Podcast and Original Content. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. I literally would not be sitting here right now if it wasn't for all of you, which sounds like such a cliche YouTuber thing to say, but I actually really do mean it. So these awards are just as much for you as they are for me. Maybe we can sort out a custody sheet for them or something. Okay, I've got to go because this is already way too long, so bye.